if you're halfway through something, and it's been terribly badly managed, really a national disgrace as a project, do you say, well, okay, that's it, I'm stopping this? Or do you say, well, actually, now we're halfway through, we have to at least complete and make sense of the part that's, the parts that we can still do?
Let's discuss some of the morning stories with the former Conservative leader, William Hague. Good morning, William.
Good morning.
And the former Scottish Labour leader, Kezia Dugdale. Let's start by talking about Suella Braverman. The Home Secretary is trying to redefine what makes a refugee in an effort to overhaul the Refugee Convention and reduce the number of people seeking protection. She's in the US today and she's going to be arguing that the term has been watered down and you shouldn't simply be able to claim asylum if you're being discriminated against for being gay or being a woman. The Policing Minister, Chris Philp, explained to Times Radio earlier this morning.
We've seen people using asylum claims who are essentially economic migrants, and we've also seen people sort of shopping around between different countries to choose where to claim asylum. And that's not how the UN Refugee Convention was originally designed. It's not designed for people to, circulate in Europe for a number of years before deciding sort of where to claim asylum and making dangerous and illegal journeys in doing so. We see that, of course, across the English Channel, where people are leaving France, which is an obviously safe country where you can quite easily claim asylum. No one needs to cross the English Channel on a rubber dinghy to, escape danger.
That was the Policing Minister, Chris Philp. William Hague, I wonder if it's right to, or is it possible to say that this refugee convention is, of course, out of date, that it's been perhaps misused in some cases, misinterpreted by other people, but that by trying to get many, many countries to agree a redefinition of terms that have been in operation for 70 years is unlikely and looks like a bit of a distraction from Suella Braverman?
Well, I think there's something in all of that. I think that it is out of date, clearly. I think it's not going to survive the world's current system for defining and trying to manage refugee flows, migration flows. It isn't going to survive. When you look at what happened in Italy 10 days ago, where the island of Lampedusa was completely overwhelmed by thousands of people arriving at the same time, the reception center for a few hundred. It's not going to survive. The countries are going to opt out of it, or much better, there is going to be some agreed reform of it. So I think it's reasonable enough to go and make the case in America there needs to be an agreed reform. But you're also quite right that that's phenomenally difficult to negotiate that. So I suspect, sadly, we will end up with countries opting out of it in the coming years because it will be so difficult to reform it.
And what about the focus here? Because the figures are interesting. We can talk around and talk up an issue, actually, when, although it looms large in many people's minds, statistically, it's quite a small problem. Last year, there were just over 80,000 asylum applications in the UK, around 21% of all immigrants to the UK. Suella Braverman has also, William Hague, chosen to focus in, as an example, the LGBT plus community. And sexual orientation, apparently in 2021, was cited in only 1% of asylum claims. So is she talking about something that is not actually a problem?
Well, it's very important that anybody being persecuted on grounds of sexuality is able to claim asylum in another country. However, I'm not sure that is the main point of it's one of the points that could be taken from Suella Braverman's speech, as the extracts we've seen so far. But the overall argument she's making, that now there's a blurring between genuine cases of asylum and economic migration, I think still holds. So I think that there's going to have to be a reform at some point. And that while the numbers are, we can always argue the numbers either way at the moment, there's no doubt that we're heading for an age of migration on a much greater scale than anything we've seen in recent decades, of really tens of millions of people on the move. And it's looking ahead, really, that you have to do in order to say, well, this system's got to change or it's going to break. That is really the dilemma now.
Kezia Dugdale, what do you make of the word or the definition of persecution? Because we asked John Hayes, friend of Suella Braverman, former Home Office Minister, of course, about if someone lives in a country where it's illegal to be gay, does the existence of that law, just the existence of that law, mean that that person is persecuted? And he seemed to suggest, no, it wasn't, that there would have to be some kind of explicit action, that someone would have to be harassed or detained in some way for them to be able to say that they were being persecuted. What would you say to that?
I think if you're gay and you live in a country where it's illegal to be gay, and the consequence of being gay means that you're either going to be jailed or stoned to death, that is persecution in my book. And, I read this story this morning and I realised quite quickly it was designed for me to be outraged and horrified and to define her response as cheap and opportunistic and dangerous. And it is all of those things. But actually it is a sideshow, because the real issue at the heart of this debate is the fact that the UK government under the Conservatives for over a decade have completely failed to manage the asylum and refugee system. That's the issue here, not the less than 2% of people who seek refuge in this country because of their sexuality. Let's just get back to the nuts and bolts of it. The UK government have underfunded the Home Office, they've underfunded the systems that exist to support asylum and refugee claims, and they haven't got any of the support systems to support people when they get here. And it's in crisis because of decisions they took, not because of the sexuality of people that are fleeing violence hundreds or thousands of miles away.
William Hague?
Well, we see the same issues. I was talking about Italy earlier. It's a huge issue in France and so on. So, well, yes, governments have done things right and wrong. One can argue there could have been more resources faster for the Home Office.
Well, Kezia says that the government have failed.
So, well, I would say if there was a Labour government, they'd be in exactly the same situation. And the Labour Home Secretary would be going around the world saying, we need a new international convention. And they'd be scrabbling to get the money together for the Home Office, because it's becoming a problem very difficult to manage, and it's common to other countries. So it's not just something that particularly that we're doing wrong in this country. There should be more resources for dealing with backlogs, and there are now. I mean, Rishi Sunak is making a huge effort to deal with all of that, but it's not just a British problem. And so it is fair enough to bring up the case for international change.
Kezia, just finally on Suella Braverman, because there are many people who say that when it comes to migration, Suella Braverman keeps coming up with this idea that another rabbit out of a hat. And some people say that's a distraction technique from what you say you believe is a failure when it comes to successive Conservative governments to grasp this particular problem. And other people might say this is Suella Braverman actually trying to fix a problem that she feels very passionately about. And that's why she keeps coming up with all these ideas, because she's desperate for one of them to stick, for one of them to work.
So I was trying to listen really carefully to that and look for some good in the situation. I'm afraid I just don't see it. She's charged with trying to stop the boats. And rather than do the things within the United Kingdom that could help with that, she's trying to change international rules which are beyond her power and her scope to do. And I don't think you build allies and relationships with other countries across the world by acting the way that she does, if her goal is actually to find a new treaty or set of obligations that every country in the world can get behind. I mean, she's about the last person in the world that's going to be able to generate that collegiality and make those deals with international partners. So no, she is a radical because she's doing things differently, but I don't think her motivations are sound. I think they're ultimately about culture wars, dividing people, polarising debates rather than bringing people together to address what I know William sees as a very serious problem, which is how we deal with mass migration in an age of climate change. It's not the gays that are the problem here. So why are they being highlighted? I'm astonished. I'm not really, actually, because it's consistent with everything she's done before, but it's yet again another scapegoat for a much more serious problem with much more complex solutions required.
Well, let's move on to other serious problems with complex solutions. It's been a busy time for Rishi Sunak, first delaying measures to cut CO2 emissions and looking like he could delay or cancel big parts of HS2. So is he a man willing to have difficult conversations, or someone who just wants to put off difficult decisions to later? William, you're a big Rishi booster You've written a column today, Getting to Net Zero will take all our ingenuity, which includes Sunak's call for a more honest debate about the long term is right. I just worry, William, and you have to defend yourself here. Are you gaslighting us about Rishi Sunak? Because you're saying he's calling for a more honest debate, but actually what he's doing is saying we're not going to do the things we said we were going to do. That's true of HS2. It's true of net zero. He's not having a more honest debate. He's breaking a promise that he was going to do things that would help the country as we head to a futuristic world where technology and net zero is more important. And you couch it as honesty. Some would couch it as cowardice.
I think it is honesty. I mean, I know the man, and I talk to him, so I have a good idea. And I know that he is appalled by how things have been said. We'll do this by 2030, we'll do this by 2026, without actually an accompanying debate about what it means for everybody. And, what it means for that person in the off-grid house who wouldn't be able to get a boiler and so on. And I think it is honest of the Prime Minister to say, well, actually, that's not what we're going to put our effort into. Instead, in his speech last week, we're going to put our effort into giving people a bigger incentive to change their boiler, the ones who are ready to do that. And we're going to train more people to do these things in the future. And we're going to give more money to developing countries because the whole world has to play its role. That seems to me like a more honest approach than saying, oh yeah, we'll just set this target and then we'll leave everybody
was he a liar then when he was Chancellor? Because there is this belief that he'd be sort of born afresh, Aphrodite coming from the waves when he became Prime Minister. He was a rock solid prop of the previous government that was very pro net zero in exactly that way.
Well, first of all, he's pro net zero. Don't think anything has changed on net zero 2050. It's the law. He's not changing that. And when all the dust has settled on the speech last week, the United Kingdom still has the most ambitious decarbonisation program and objectives of any country in the world. So, he's not going back on net zero. He's just saying we're going to have to change how we go about it. And yet, was he in the government for 3 years before that? He was. But he wasn't in charge of all of these policies, and he was only there for the previous 3 years. So I don't think you can blame it all on him. A prime minister is meant to have a fresh look at things and not just go along with an inherited consensus.
I'll come to Kezia on this. I know honesty in politics is very important to her, but HS2 is another area, isn't there, where he's taking a fresh look at it. You were in the cabinet when HS2, everyone since 2009 has been pro HS2. You've had a northern constituency yourself, William. Where do you stand on that? Would it be wrong to delay it? Would it be wrong to cancel it?
Well, now here we have one of those, this has become even harder. It was a great idea when it was a plan to go to Leeds and Manchester and so on. And it had a budget and so on. So that was definitely something to support. As I wrote in the Times last month, it should have been cancelled a few years ago when it was clear that the whole thing was out of control, that the costs were out of control, they wouldn't be able to ever go to Leeds. So I would have cancelled it then. Now you've got this classic problem. If you're halfway through something and it's been terribly badly managed, really a national disgrace as a project, do you say, well, okay, that's it, I'm stopping this? Or do you say, well, actually, now we're halfway through, we have to at least complete and make sense of the part that's, the parts that we can still do. So that's just a genuine dilemma. And I hope that whatever is decided, Rishi Sunak will say, we are managing these things totally differently in the future in this country because we're not good at managing infrastructure, and he's one person in charge and a powerful board of experts overseeing it, and all the problems surfaced as soon as they come up, which is what you would do in most private companies if you're running a big project.
Kezia, why are we so bad at doing things like this? Where do you stand on HS2? Is it an example of just bad project management, or a bad idea, or a good idea that needs to be seen through?
Well, let me start by saying I'm looking at the HS2 website just now, and it still says it's coming to Scotland. Oh, how we laugh at that prospect. It says Edinburgh will be an integrated high-speed station where passengers can catch HS2 trains and access the high-speed network to the south. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
This train's barely getting out of London. Let's talk about that. So let me do something rare and back the Prime Minister. I actually think he's right to stop and assess how this spend is evaluated and what you get as a consequence of it. It's tripled in price. We're talking, £100 billion here. I think he is right to stop and go, are we going to get the same bang for our buck here that we thought we would 7 years ago? Or might we get greater productivity gains and adapting to the reality that the work itself has changed post-pandemic? People's patterns are changing. Might this money be better spent on regional transport solutions, going from east to west across England, rather than pretending that London will forever be the draw, and what matters is the speed that you can get to and from London? So I'm going to back him and say I think he's right to pause here. As long as the same amount of investment is spent on transport infrastructure and that it's spread across the country and not just about London, then I think he's right to pause here.
Bit of cross-party consensus there. We'll see what happens. The news is supposed to break this week, but of course he can't announce cancelling the road to Manchester.
When he's on the road to Manchester, the literal road to Manchester.
That's not good timing.
We're going to talk about the police now, because morale in the police has never been so low. You might think you've heard this for years, but actually it might be true. A crisis may have been averted over armed police in London who were threatening to give up their weapons, but they represented the repeated scandals of rogue officers, mostly, but not solely in London, accused of all sorts of wrongdoing, has affected the way that the public see the police. A recent poll showed that less than half of us trusted the police. So is low morale a problem in itself, or an inevitable consequence of the effort to fix the police? Kezia, I suppose, unless you are in the police force, have been in the police force, have people within your family who are in the police force, it's tempting and it's maybe inevitable to see it from one side, which is the headlines, and they have not been good for a couple of years now when it comes to the police. Do you think that low morale in the police is down to the police, or is it down to our perception of them?
Don't know, in truth, but I do think that you automatically get low morale as a consequence of any process of change, at least in the initial stages. The challenge is to build out of that so that you can improve it in the long run. Trust in the police is low, as you have described, for a number of different reasons. And I certainly don't think you build that up by changing the rules for police officers so that they face less scrutiny than they currently do, because ultimately it's about a hierarchy of power here. And if you've got a man, or indeed a woman, in a uniform carrying a firearm, then they should be subject to the highest possible standards of scrutiny and accountability. And if byproduct of that is low morale because they're treated with higher standards than everybody else, then I think we should just accept that that's the nature of the job.
That's very interesting, William. Is this a case that we are being too hard on police officers and we're kind of lumping them all together? Or actually, are we now catching up and holding them to these high standards rather than kind of giving them immunity from all sorts of things?
Well, we are slightly lumping them all together. I feel there have been some terrible scandals involving the police, as we can all remember, in recent months and years. So that means a whole culture needs putting right in something like the Metropolitan Police. However, we do tend to lump them together. I feel a familiarity with the armed police of the Metropolitan Police, because for years, when I was Foreign Secretary, I was surrounded by them. I virtually lived with them. And there are some wonderful, all of them actually, that I ever saw, which was many dozens of them, were really highly trained, very mature, very responsible, considerate people who have a very difficult job because they can have a split second suddenly to decide whether they're going to shoot somebody. So they clearly feel one of their colleagues was unfairly treated, which has led to the recent trouble. And I'm glad that that's being said, that they are being given some assurances about fair treatment. So I do think we tend to lump them all together. We do have some very highly trained and excellent parts of our police forces, and we shouldn't think that the whole system and the whole force is wrong.
I suppose, though, William, maybe it's about who we are and how we respond to a poll that says, do you trust the police? Because I suppose you've talked about your experience, very high level in government, and obviously you trust them because you relied on them and they were kind of looking after you. But a woman who's asked that question, with all the scandals that have gone on recently, is more likely to, I think, say that they don't trust them. And it's I suppose it's how you approach the question, isn't it? It's about your own experience.
Yes, definitely. I totally agree with that. And that has got to be put right. That's the bit, as I was mentioning earlier, that has absolutely got to be put right. But I do think it's also true that it's not all of our police forces and police constables that are at fault. There's still some very good people in them.
Kezia Dugdale.
What a person that would be.
I know. I think I would like that person. Absolute mishmash of the two of you. Kezia Dugdale, do you trust the police?
Yes, I do. But it's not absolute, and it has to be earned, and it shapes with time. But fundamentally, of course, I trust the police.
Interesting.
I don't. Ooh. I don't trust anyone who craves power. I don't trust any politicians.
I just, as someone who lives in London, and as a woman, with everything that's gone on, I'm really not sure. I'm not sure. I can't say yes or no.
Yeah, so you'd be sceptical.
I'd be really sceptical.
Yeah, would you be sceptical, Kezia? Even within, is that what you're saying? You're kind of sceptical, but yes.
Sure, but my default position would be to trust them and to believe that within the conglomerate of the police there are bad eggs and people who will do bad things. But fundamentally, people that join the police are driven by values of public service.
Yeah, that's cool.
And I believe that first and foremost.
I think cynicism is a dangerous thing, and it's easy to be infected by it. So maybe that's a fair point as well. Now, finally, we want to get to this. In Times 2 today, the paper's fashion editor Anna Murphy shows off her splits. She's 51 and proud of the skill, although she admits she might not be able to keep it up at 78 like Angela Rippon. So we're going to try and explore your secret skills, but let's start on the obvious one. William Hague, we know that you're a lithe, lycra-clad wild swimmer. Does that mean you can do the splits?
No. Flexibility isn't necessarily one of my skills. No, I can do many things. I can still do all my old judo moves. I'm a martial arts guy. And while I don't go to my judo club regularly these days, I can still do all those moves. So it's important not to mess with me. Really.
So if I walked up to you in a threatening fashion, I would never do that. But would you be able to toss me to the floor easily?
Oh yeah, very easily, because you're quite tall, and you could be thrown straight over.
He's got short legs.
You've got a high centre of gravity, so you could be knocked over with no difficulty whatsoever.
You've got no worries about that. Okay, so you throw me to the floor like a rag doll. Yes,
that's his party trick.
That's a good party trick. Maybe we should do that as an event one day. Splits, no. Kezia, splits.
Absolutely not. Well, what I've learned here is that William doesn't need armed police, right?
Yeah.
Single-hand combat is the game for him. No, I can't do the splits and pretty short party tricks. The one thing I could do is juggle, but literally nobody is impressed by that.
I am.
Oh, my daughter would be so impressed by that. How many things can you juggle? How many socks?
3,
but
I can do like multiple different shapes of things. That's 3 minutes.
It's still 3 though. It's still 3, Kezia.
Still 3.
3 more than you.
Can you do, Stig?
I can do 2. I can do 2. Everyone can do 2.
Are you sure about
that? That's just throwing, isn't it? She can do 1 more than me.
That's a lot.
That makes it juggling. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Could you maybe practice to get a 4? Maybe for next week.
Right. It's very hard.
It is very hard. I could never even do yo-yos. I couldn't even make a yo-yo. You know, people who could do the sort of tricks with yo-yos.
None of it.
And don't get
Can you hula hoop? Not with that centre of gravity.
No, I can't do hula hooping. I can't. William Hague, can you hula hoop? I can imagine William Hague hula hooping.
I think that's enough.
I'm not practiced at that. No, I think no. I'm going to stick to fighting, I think.
He's so rugged, isn't he? I think so. Next week we want to see.
He's a fighter, not a lover.
There was some point when you have William Hague throwing me to the ground and Kezia juggling 4 balls. This could be like a live event.
That's all you can hope for, with Barry Manilow in the background singing away.
It's a funny old day, isn't it?
Well, listen, that went in unexpected places, but that's what happens every Tuesday with William Hague and Kezia Dugdale. Thank you so much.